Classic Game Room is brought to you by Magnum Skywolf. CGR is supported by fans on Patreon. Thank you. Welcome to Classic Game Room Mark III for a review on the Sega Mark III. This is Pitfall II. Enjoy. What a horrible way to go. Pitfall II, still falling into pits after all these years. This is an interesting 1985 Sega reprogrammed release of Activision's classic Pitfall II, The Lost Caverns, which debuted on the Atari 2600 in 1984 and remains widely regarded as one of the greatest Atari 2600 games of all time. I had it when I was a kid and I still love Pitfall II. And this may be one of the only times in history that anyone can say that the Atari 2600 version is better than the Sega version. But let me stress that may be subjective. It's a great game, there's no doubt about it, but one of the things that made Pitfall II so amazing on the Atari is that they were able to pull it off on the Atari. In the days before adventure games were common, Pitfall 2 took you somewhere, deep into these caverns, on your Atari 2600, which wasn't supposed to be able to do that, but it did. Now, I would expect that from the Sega SG-1000. I mean, it's a Sega, right? It's almost the Master System. That's far more powerful than the Atari 2600, right? Right? Well, maybe. It's not the lack of power that makes this the inferior version of Pitfall 2, it's that the development team didn't understand what made Pitfall 2 really cool. It's supposed to be the Lost Caverns, not Pitfall 2, the Tedious Caverns, which is what they've turned this game into. Pitfall 2, the Lost Caverns for the Atari 2600. Being played on Atari 7800. Does the job. So one of the things I actually did while reviewing this was play them both back to back. Pitfall 2 versus Pitfall 2. Atari versus Sega. Who wins? We all do, because they're both great. How is this possible? The Atari 2600 version of Pitfall 2 is vastly superior to the Sega SG-1000 version in every way. Sega Genesis fanboy Mark is very confused, while Atari fanboy Mark is extremely proud. Even though this game isn't technically on the Sega Genesis, I don't have a Sega SG-1000 shirt yet. For starters, the Atari 2600 version plays better. It just feels lighter on its feet and more responsive, even though all you're doing is jumping and swinging and climbing and dying. Occasionally swimming, but that's usually also followed by dying. The Atari 2600 version sounds better. It has that old school Casio keyboard feel to it, which the Sega version does not have. Also, there's checkpoints in the Atari version. When you get killed, you go back to one of the crosses that you walked over on the ground. The level designs are different, and the Atari version is far less rigid. That's my biggest issue with the Sega one. You do the exact same thing every single time you play the game. Gold! Yeah! In the Atari version, when you pick up a block of gold, the music speeds up. It's like you're being rewarded. Even the Atari 2600 music is better, and that shouldn't be possible. Atari fanboy Mark is very pleased with this. Sega fanboy Mark is confused, but I do appreciate a different version of Pitfall 2. My favorite part of it is without a doubt that in Japan, when you go spelunking, you dress up for the occasion. You put on your best clothes and a snappy hat. In the West, we go out looking like Indiana Jones, but in Japan, you go adventuring like Golgo 13, and you gotta respect that. Even underwater, my man looks sharp. This isn't Pitfall Harry, this is Pitfall Toshiro Mifune. It's unfortunate that you can't stab anybody with a samurai sword. It may not look like it on screen, but Pitfall II: The Lost Caverns has to be played perfectly. You have to avoid enemies the exact same way each time. You climb the ladder and stop just at the right place. When you get a bag of money, you fall into the water because it's safer, then you climb back up, dodge the frog the exact same way, jump over the thing the same way, ride the balloon the same way. Each time you play the game, you get a little further. Maybe you figure out which one of the mining carts to ride and where to jump off, but it becomes a tedious adventure because there's very little variation in the gameplay. Yay, mining carts. It doesn't look that bad, and, you know, it's certainly an interesting take on Pitfall 2, but ultimately it's not nearly as much fun as the Atari version. However, it is fascinating, and I have a classic game room shout out and thank you going all the way to Ahmed from Springfield Gardens, New York. To my man Alpha Royd, thank you very much once again. Oh, and by the way, he hooked the show up with an MSX, so anyone ever play Scion? Oh, you're gonna want to. Pitfall 2 on the Sega has its moments, but honestly, I'd stick with the Atari one, which is really cheap and easy to find. It's tons of fun. Unless you like challenging games where you tiptoe through them and memorize every bit of each level, in which case, well, you'll probably love this one. Just remember to wear your best hat when exploring the tedious caverns. Thank you for watching. Follow Classic Game Room on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Patreon. Don't miss Magnum Skywolf, also on Patreon. Welcome to the club. It's the Lord Carnage Club, where I celebrate these backers on Patreon by shouting their name in a volcano. Introducing Michael Fernandez. Oh yeah! Michael Nelson! Lord Carnage approves. Jim Moriarty! Sergio Matthias! Hergert! Jason from Kamloops, British Columbia! Fizzy! Signal! Al Shiver! Sean Zoltek. I'm just kidding again. Sean Zoltek! Stephen Chucknick from New Jersey. Landon Ellerby! He's the administrator of these credits. Philip Strabenmuller of Vienna, Austria. Woo! Jack Stavris from Australia, home of Mad Max. Ohad Kane! Cue the thunder. Jeff, Captain Dauntless, Briar, Rick DeBarros. Out of sight. Will. Kid Shuriken. Fatality. Ship. Sink bail. That was too evil, wasn't it? Let's try that again. Ship. Sink bail. See you next time on Classic Game Room. Thanks for watching.